and that is, first of all, why is Elijah the prophet invited to the Seder? So let's deal with that in a more detailed way. So after traditionally after the grace after meals, after Birkat Hamazon at the Seder, there's a custom to pour a cup of wine, the cup of Eliyahu, Elijah, to open the front door of the home and recite several verses. And the verses are very controversial, as you know. It's called Shvoch HaMatcha, where you ask God, beseech God to pour his wrath upon our persecutors and oppressors. So it's a very late addition, and there is an attempt to modify it in the Haggadah, a different night. You may have seen that one where they also say, "And let us praise all of the nations of the world and people who have been good to us." So, it's a bit of a balance, but the idea would be that this was a chance to really express the problem of hostility towards Jews, particularly in the Middle Ages, and this is when this became part of the Seder. It's not there from the very beginning of the Seder. So, according to the tradition, this moment, our houses are graced by the presence of Eliyahu and Havi, and there are many reasons and meanings behind this. And of course, one of them that we have is that he is considered to be a person who brings good tidings. That's really important, good tidings. So the Torah describes the night of Passover. I mentioned this in passing, but I wanted to just make sure we have it down. Pat, the Torah describes the night of Passover as a Leil Shimurim. The word Shomer, a guarded night. It is the night when, if you recall, the Jews were saved from the plague of the death of the firstborn, and they on that night when God's protection over His people, of course, was the idea that they would be saved. So opening the door to this at this point expresses our trust, if you will, in God's protection. Going back to that story also of the Passover night, which we talk a great deal about, they were asked to put blood of the lamb, which they had taken on the 10th day, and to very explicitly take the blood and to put it on the doorposts as a symbol of the fact that they are a home of Israelites who will be willing to follow this crazy guy, Moshe, who's a bit of a nut. Now, this blood was a mixture of two things. And again, we're all over 18. It is a mixture of the blood of the lamb and the mixture of the blood of circumcision. And you see how this begins to tie Eliyahu also to the fact that he's there for every Brit Milah. So one was not permitted, according to the text, to be at a Seder unless one had been circumcised. And the idea was that there were so many who had lived in captivity that they did not get circumcised. There's a similar thing that happened, if you recall, when the Soviet Jews were allowed to leave and go to Israel. There was literally thousands of males who were not circumcised in Russia because of a fear of oppression that wanted to be circumcised. So that became an important idea, that the blood that protected them was a mixture of the blood of circumcision as well as that of the lamb. So when opening the door, we take an opportunity to invite the prophet Eliyahu. And this is the same Eliyahu that I mentioned who visits everyone at the Brit and testifies that the Jewish people are scrupulously regarding the mitzvah of circumcision. And males were permitted to take part of it only if they were circumcised. Thus, he comes to the Seder to testify that all present are indeed circumcised. How he knows this, I don't know. He doesn't necessarily ask for visual proof, I understand, but whatever. Additionally, according to the Midrash, and remember the Midrash is the rabbinic imagination, on the night prior to the Exodus, Yetziat Mitzrayim, that first Seder, it wasn't a Seder night, the first Passover, they found this again. They play a great deal in the fact that there was a connection between Elijah circumcision and Erev Pesach. But the cup of Elijah is basically based upon a different issue. And I'll read it to you basically a little bit from the text in Exodus, in Shemot chapter 6, starting with verse 6, verse 6. And it says, say therefore to the Israelite people, Ani Adonai, and the word here, and I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you out of outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be the Lord your God, and you shall know that I, Adonai, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. And then verse 8 says, and I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I will give to you as a possession. So you have these phrases, and the rabbis say that each of the cups of wine are based upon the language of deliverance. So, for instance, the first word in verse 6 is vehotzeti, and I took you out and then the second word is vehitzalti, and I saved you, and the third one is vegaalti, and I redeemed you, and then in verse 7, vilakachti, and I took you to be a people to me, and then in verse 8, veheveti etchem, and I brought you. So the rabbis asked the question, if indeed every cup of wine is a toast, basically, to these words, why aren't there 5 cups at the Seder, and why are there only 4? So there's an argument. The issue is never resolved. So this is another thing.
Moshe,
yeah, please.
Excuse me. Yeah. When was this language put in? And is this a Midrashic
The language is in
argument?
the Torah. The language is in the Torah. The question they ask is, why did you have to say 5 different things? Why wasn't it enough to say, I brought you out of Egypt? No, fine. But why this thing? So they understood that each of these was a certain kind of either developmental stage or some other kind of stage, and each one deserved a cup of wine. Remember, every cup of wine we drink at the Seder is a toast. We lift the cup, we say a toast, we make a l'chaim, and it's a celebratory act. It's become so ritualized, but the bottom line, because so many people drink wine now in between the cups of wine, by the time they get to the 4th cup, and etc. Sure that may have been the case, but I don't think so. I think people didn't have as much, if you will, money as we have, that they can keep drinking wine all the way through the night. So they at least had 4 cups. So the question is, why 4 and not 5? That's really the question. Because one of the things that Elijah does is he comes to answer questions. That's one of the things we talked about briefly, is that in the Talmud, when they reach a place where they can't find an answer, that they come to a place called teku, a tie, if you will. There's no decision being made. They took that teku, and it says Tishbi Yavo Yitaretz Bayot Ukushiyot, that Tishbi will come, and the Elijah will come, and he will settle all of those arguments. So here was another reason Elijah says, I'll settle the argument basically by saying, have 4 and also have 5. Right? You're right, and you're right too. Right? A very Jewish way of seeing it. So we put the cup of Elijah to deal with that issue of 4 or 5. So the status of Elijah's cup is really, interesting. In my family, what we do is I have a very large cup that my wife bought me, so large you could swim in it, the swimming pool. So I have everyone around the table take part of their wine and pour it into the cup. So the 5th cup is basically becomes a representative cup for everyone who is at the table. I found that to be a good ritual that I've started, and it seems to people seem to like it. So the the timing of Elijah's coming is, as I said, to do that about the circumcision. But then my interpretation, of course, which I mentioned to you, which I'll mention to you again, is that when Elijah is mentioned in the last book of the prophets, Malachi, which we read the Haftorah on of Malachi on the Shabbos before Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol. There he says, and Elijah will come to be a herald of that great day, Yom Gadol, Vidnorah, an awesome day or remarkable day, and he will basically try to avoid utter destruction. And the way he's going to try to do that and bring upon us the possibility of the Messianic age is that he will turn the hearts of the children to the fathers and the hearts of the fathers to the children. So that becomes one of the reasons I give for Elijah's coming, is that he has a job to do to check if the intergenerational conversation is being held. Because ultimately that's what the Seder's great success was, that you had this intergenerational phenomena that took place for thousands of years. And in that if you can get a serious conversation going, which is possible, by the way, that it becomes an opportunity to really express a lot of important things from the older generation to the younger generation, who will claim not to hear it, except when they get older, they'll be telling the same thing to their children as well, right? It's a very obvious thing. So the Seder, which of course represents the first, if you will, redemption, right? Which becomes the exemplar of what redemption will be at the end of days. It's very appropriate to have Elijah there. So that's the thing. Now, I remember Betsy told us last week that he was sort of portrayed in her home as the boogeyman, etc. That's not necessarily how the rabbis see him. But and this idea that Elijah drinks from the fifth cup is also that was made for the kids, right? And what you were supposed to do is shake the table, right? Oh, look, it's drinking from it, right? I usually put a straw in and see if he'll take the straw. Not so. I can see the people saying, "Oh, the rabbi puts a straw in that cup." No. So that's the Seder thing. Any questions about that? And I'm going to move on to the other two things that I wanted to cover tonight. Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I was taught that the reason why Elijah comes to Passover is to make sure that we're celebrating it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Celebrate, exactly. Because it's supposed to be, it's a symbol of our continuity. Sure, absolutely. Because it says in the Torah, all of the major festivals, it said Chukat Olam. This should be forever. Oh. This is not something that we put down, because it becomes important to have a historical overlay and a theological overlay, the agricultural reality of what this is about. But this is all basically agricultural, right? We were farmers with the time of the barley, et cetera, et cetera. Another little theory I have, which you can take or leave, is that Moses' role in the Exodus story, by making Passover the way it is, where you have to get rid of chametz, right? Anything that's leavened, and that you have to offer up a lamb, is to remind the people who have been in slavery, some say 200 years, some say 400 years, that they were once not slaves back in Canaan. They were not slaves in Canaan. They were shepherds, and some of them were agriculturalists. And those who are agriculturalists know that when the fresh barley is harvested, you have to make sure that the silo or the bin that you're going to put the barley in is totally scraped of any possible mold from the previous season's barley. So that became this idea of scrupulously removing chametz. because it was vital. Because if not, your new barley will get contaminated from the old. And that explains why people have taken this idea of chametz to such an extreme in many communities, literally, scraping it down in a way. So that was one way to remember that, by reminding them about the chametz issue. And the second theory I have is that the offering of the lamb was because when you're a shepherd, it was very common to offer up a lamb in Thanksgiving for the spring, what's the term used? The spring birthings of the new sheep, right? Of the lambs. So offering up a lamb was part of what they used to do. So it was reminding them. So the Passover reminds them of these two pre-slavery ways that they lived and hopefully would return to once they reached Canaan again, the land of Israel again. So that's just my theory about the Passover, etc. And you can either take it or leave it or turn it into a short story, whatever you like. So those talented among you might do so. So any more questions about the Passover connection?
Let's see.
Yes, please.
I have a question that just occurred to me. It's not a question, it's an observation.
Yes.
That in a sense, Elijah visits the homes of those having Passover Seders. It's antithetical. It's like he is a person of life. Or could we say he is a person of life? Because in fact,
well, he never dies, right? He never dies.
We call it Passover because of the blood that was put on the doorposts,
which saved us from death.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. From the angel.
It's a pretty remarkable thing, right?
From the angel.
Yeah, please go on.
From the angel of death, and so that Elijah is antithetical to the angel of death.
I mean, if you just go back to that story a little bit, just think about it. Not everybody. I can imagine there were many Israelites who were afraid of doing that.
Yes.
Of putting the blood on the door, because it was saying, I'm ready to leave. This was an act of rebellion. This was an externalized saying, I really think that this plague is going to do it. Right? All the other plagues didn't help much, but this one might do it. And I'm sure there are many who were fearful of doing that, because if the plague did not happen, they would have marked themselves as people who took a lamb, which was worshipped by some of the Egyptians. There were some Egyptian groups that worshipped the lamb, and they would see them as, of course, transgressors. But I like the idea that rather than having the angel of death, we have the prophet of life that we invite into our homes. And I think that's really true about what Passover is. It's about rebirth. It's about rebirth, constantly rebirth. Some would even say that the blood on the doorpost was the birth canal, which was, that's part of the birthing process, right? And others say the birth canal was Yam Suf, the Reed Sea. There are different ways of understanding this, but I agree. I think Elijah symbolizes that the covenant has not been broken, and then when we get to him at the Seder, you'll see that even more clearly why he's there. So, if any more comments on that part before we move on?
Question, Reb Moshe?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I may have missed this part. Is the tradition that Elijah comes to the Seder, is that actually in the Torah, or is that Midrash?
It's totally part of the rabbinic, not even the early rabbinic. It's not there in the original formation of the Seder, which took many years to develop. It didn't happen all at once. It probably happened in bits and pieces and was eventually put together. And this is very late. This, I would say, is probably medieval.
So my question is, why Elijah? Why not Moses? I mean, why pick out this prophet?
It's a great question. It's a great question. We'll ask the same question when we get to the Brit. Why Eliyahu and why not Abraham?
Right.
Which would have been the obvious one, right? Moshe's absence from the Seder has been commented on for many, many years. He's literally not mentioned at all in the Haggadah. And people have been asking this question for a very long time, and they've given many different answers. But one answer that is that Moshe is called the most modest person, Anav. He's an Anav. And he often says, let the people live, take me out of the Torah. I don't have to be he was not a narcissistic guy. So in many ways, he wanted to tone down his role. And also there was an attempt to do that in the Torah itself, because at the end of his life, his burial place is not revealed. There was a fear perhaps it would become a shrine, as many places are shrines, and people will go to worship him and turn him into a sort of a demigod, if at least that, or a saint, or whatever. So maybe that's the same reason, not to make Moshe the central point, that Moshe at best was a transmitter of God's will. He was the prophet of prophets, we call him, by the way. He's the prophet of prophets. And he was but I feel bad for Moshe. He deserves a little bit. Now, some of the newer Haggadot, then there are new ones coming out all the time, bring Moshe back in. And when they had, I remember when I was living in Israel, I saw a number of kibbutz Haggadot of the secular kibbutzim, and they threw out the rabbinic Haggadah altogether and read the actual texts from Exodus, right? Which would definitely have Moshe in them. It's not a terrible idea, by the way, to read the actual Exodus story, not from a rabbinic point of view. Because remember, the Haggadah is an attempt by the rabbis to teach people what Midrash is, of how you interpret text. And the part that most people skip is a very, very interesting part where they go through each verse in the Torah and give Midrash on it, which means their take on it. And the idea being to educate people to this process of Midrashic thinking. And Midrashic thinking means you can't be a literalist. You always have to be able, as we do with Torah study, right? We always have to be able to deconstruct it in order to rebuild it. And that's the way we go about studying Jewish texts. So, but that's in there in the middle. And I even think there's some humor there as well, when they start talking about how many plagues were there. They said, well, there weren't only 10. It was one for every finger of God. So it was 50. And they said, no, it was 5 times 50. So for me, I find that a little funny that they would be worried about how many plagues there were. But there was, but whatever it is, it's very obvious that Moshe is absent. It's very obvious. It is, as I say, I have a little bit of compassion for him that
at least you took his name, so he should be honored.
At least I took his name.
Right, he should be honored.
I got it from my Zeta and his Zeta, probably his Zeta, right? And I do some genealogical research, and I try to find stuff, and I find my name in line, but unfortunately I find Moshe Waldach's born in 1939, who was killed in the Shoah. There must have been a cousin or something like that. He named after the same Zeta, right? But it's Moshe did well in the name department. Except it's funny, in modern Israel, you would not. Very few kids have these biblical names anymore. It'll change, but right now the fashion there is to name you after a plant or a tree, very Hopi like our Native American brothers, or name you after a season, right? Or name you like Stav is a big name now. Autumn, Stav. You hear a lot of Stavs, right? We'll see what happens next. We had the same thing. We had Sarah, we had Rebecca, and then we had Tiffany for a while. Remember that? And then eventually we gave coming back, and the kids are named. We have Maxes and Sophies again, and we have all those names, and we now have a lot of biblical names back again. Okay. Any other comments before we move on? Okay. Now moving on to why there's a chair for Elijah at a Brit Milah. There's a chair at the circumcision ceremony, which is called a Brit Milah. It is customary to have a seat designated for Eliyahu HaNavi, Elijah the prophet. In some communities, there is a communal kisei shel Eliyahu, usually a very beautiful seat that's built up a little high off the ground like a stool, and it's where the baby is placed, sometimes in the lap of someone sitting or someone on the actual chair itself. It is referred to, because Elijah is referred to the angel of the Brit, Malach HaBrit, Malach, not Melech, but Malach. And he visits every circumcision ceremony. And the reason is this. If you recall from our beginnings of our study, the period when the nation of Israel was split into two kingdoms. Elijah the prophet had a showdown. You remember at Mount Carmel with the false prophets of Baal, and they eventually were done away with, and the king of the northern kingdom, Ahab, together with his wicked wife Jezebel, remember, sent a message to the prophet Elijah, at this time tomorrow, I will make your life like the life of one of them. I will kill you. So he runs away. And remember, he goes to where? He goes to 40 days later, he wanders to the desert, and he comes to the mountain of Horeb, which is in the province of Sinai. Some call it Mount Sinai, where he spent the night. And there God revealed himself to Elijah and said, Elijah, why are you here? And Elijah replied, I have been zealous for Adonai Tzivaot, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, have forsaken your Brit, and they seek my life to take it. Okay? The children of Israel, meaning now the children of the northern kingdom. So he's associated with saying that what was broken and what caused this kind of evil to persist was the lack of the observance of Brit Milah. Okay? And remember, we talked about the fact that in later Elijah is toned down. He's not only zealous for God, he has to become zealous for us as well. And thus he begins to be seen as someone who is involved with helping the poor, etc., etc. So, which covenant did they forsake, right?
Really?
And the Midrash said that Eliyahu was referring to Brit Milah. Furthermore, according to one Midrash, not only did Elijah complain about them abandoning the Brit Milah, but in his zealotry, and this is his zealousness, he asked God to punish the sinners of Israel. So the Midrash says that God rebuked him. God rebuked him, saying, they abandoned my covenant, not yours. They dismantled my altars, not yours. Killed my prophets, not yours. Why are you more zealous than I am? God says. And I vow, continued God in this Midrash, that whenever my children make this sign in their flesh, right, whenever there is a Brit Milah, you will be present. And the mouth which testify that the Jewish people have abandoned my covenant will testify that they are keeping it. So in a sense, God assigns Elijah to forever be the witness that his accusation was not to be true, and that the people indeed returned to the covenant. So by attending every Brit Milah, Elijah is given an opportunity to rectify his mistake by testifying in the favor of the people and to the credit that they keep the covenant. It is for this reason that the seat of Elijah was created, to honor him. And at the Brit Milah, we pray that just as Elijah came to testify for us, so may he come and herald, as he is the heralder, if you will, the herald of the future redemption. So that's the official line on why Elijah is there. I don't think he's coming for the bagels and lox. but it's quite possible. But speaking of circumcision, for the first time in many years, it seems to be now a tremendous anti-circumcision movement, not only for Jews.
Mm.
In the United States, 80% of the males were circumcised in the hospital. 80%. So the American phallus was a circumcised phallus, right? Whereas in Europe, that was not the case, right? So there's now a lot of controversy about whether anybody should be circumcised, and they're called intactivists. Intactivists, that's the term they use, meaning keep the penis intact. And they begin to describe the circumcision as a form of mutilation, which creates trauma. I don't know. I guess I'm traumatized still, but whatever. So it's going to be very interesting in the coming years when more and more Jewish couples who have children will not circumcise their sons. So it's going to be interesting to see how we deal with that. Can we create ceremonies that are equivalent to covenantal ceremonies without the physical brit? It's the first time we've had to deal with that. Now, a child who's born of a Jewish mother in our tradition is still Jewish, whether they have a brit or not. That's not the issue about being Jewish, but the issue is whether we are continuing the mitzvah of Avraham Avinu. That I'm glad I segued to that, because why isn't Avraham at this event? Because Avraham never doubted the fact that this circumcision would continue on forever. He never had that issue. So he is not the person who has to come and see his original brit justified. And also the parents say a blessing before the brit, which says we are bringing this child into the covenant of Avraham Avinu. So every parent who is doing a traditional brit is basically saying that we are fulfilling the original brit of Avraham Avinu. So it's interesting times. These intactivists are getting quite popular all over the place. At one time, there was a CDC statement that circumcision was medically beneficial. That no longer is the case, in the sense that it may be, it may not be, but there's no proof, and that's leading a lot of people to stay away from traditional circumcision. So we'll see what happens, and it's going to be interesting. What can I say? It's never dull. Okay, when it comes to Jews, it's never dull. So, any questions about that before we get to the next thing I want to cover before?
Yeah, I
we go
have
into some of the
a
discussion?
question.
Yes,
In terms of Midrash was written over many, many years, right? Hundreds
Correct.
of years.
Right.
And so how uniform or unified is the impression and the description of Elijah, Eliyahu? I
Right.
mean, or is it controversial during some times, or taking another aspect and seen from other viewpoints?
Right. We mentioned last week when we talked about Elijah in the Talmud and later in mysticism, there seems to be almost an overall acceptance of Elijah and what is called the revelation of Elijah, the Gilui Eliyahu, all across the board. It's very fascinating because of Elijah's specific nature of being someone who was brought up into heaven without dying. He's given this extraordinary, almost angelic, if you will, kind of role. And that continues on, and as I say, later gets transformed into Jewish folklore as being a person who helps us reveal our better natures. And as I say, and starts attending all of these things. It is quite remarkable about how across the board Elijah's presence is seen as a blessing. It is quite. It's really something. We even say that at the benching, at the end of a benching, right? Eliyahu Navi Zachur Latov, may he be remembered for good. Zachur Latov. So there's a he had a good press agent, whoever it was. It was great. He got a lot of good press. You don't find that about everybody, right? But most of the, I would say people, even the patriarchs who are occasionally criticized in the Midrash, for the most part, there is an acceptance of the patriarchs and of Moses, etc., etc. So yeah, you don't find any controversy about that. Anything else? Okay, great. Let's get to the next one, which is the third thing, which is where we find this ubiquitous Elijah, Eliyahu, all right, who has a double God name. My God is Yahu. He is God. That's what it means, basically. Now, there's a widespread custom, both in Ashkenazim and Sephardim, that they sing something about Eliyahu at the end of Shabbat. Okay, we do it quite very, as you know, Eliyahu HaNavi, and now there are new tunes for that, etc. So why is that? Because we are hoping that in our singing of that song, Elijah will come and he will proclaim that the redemption is starting to take place, right? So what is the connection, however, with Elijah and Saturday night, etc.? Well, the basic rationale is what we know from what we said earlier in the final book of the prophets, Malachi, where he talks about Elijah being the harbinger of the arrival of the Mashiach and the final redemption. So that's probably a basic rationale. We hope that we can now, before we start the new week, start a new life in a redemption. So the Talmud states that Elijah will not come on a Friday. This is a little bit of Jewish humor for me. So he wouldn't disturb Jewish people while they're in the midst of their Shabbos prep. Okay,
Yeah.
they're shopping and stuff. They don't have time for that. Additionally, there is a prohibition. This is a far out one against traveling beyond a certain limit on Shabbat. It's called Tchum Shabbat, which is 2,000 cubits outside of the city. You weren't supposed to travel on Shabbat more than 2,000 cubits, amot, outside of the city. A cubit is about 18 to 21 inches. So I'll let the mathematicians among you figure what 2,000 are. According to this view, this applies to non-terrestrial journeys as well as traveling higher, and this is interesting, than 10 tfachim, 10 hand breadths off the ground. Okay, so you're not allowed to levitate more than 10 hands. I believe in modern measurement of horses, we still use the term hands. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this comes from a very old idea. So Elijah couldn't come on Shabbos. At least that's one of the reasons given. A little shvach for me, not a great reason, whatever. So based on this, once Shabbat has passed, Elijah can come once again, and we mention his name, that he should arrive and he should announce the redemption, right? That would be it. Now, it's a little complicated because one of the reasons given for the bisamim, is that we have to revive our souls because our souls are somehow, our extra soul has left us and we have to revive our soul. And also because we're disappointed that the Mashiach has not yet come, but it's not necessarily the reasoning. So based on this was not it was not a unanimous opinion on this, because some people say, what do you mean he can't come on Shabbos? He's Elijah. He can come when he wants to come, right? And he could be he obviously the Mashiach can come at any moment. So there was an exchange between two Hasidic rabbis that noted that we pray for the Mashiach to come each day. including Shabbat. And when asked how it fits in with the above statements about Elijah's coming, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, not this current, not the one who died in 94, who some claim is coming back, he replied that Eliyahu is destined to answer many of the outstanding, complicated questions that the sages have. And certainly he'll be able to come on Shabbat and answer how it fits as well. Going back to what we said earlier, Elijah's job is to clarify things. So there's a little aspect of clarification, of making things clear. And one of the steps in the process of redemption, you should know, is that people will find out what their original tribal affiliation was. So we who have become sort of only Kohanim, Leviim, and this general category of Yisrael, Elijah will be able to tell us which original, if you will. Why? Because when we return to the land, the original geography of the land and its original distribution among the tribes of Israel will happen again. At least that's the mythology. It will happen again. So he has to come and be able to answer. And so what does he say? He says, if indeed Elijah is going to come and answer all kinds of complicated questions, he'll also figure out how to answer his coming on Shabbat. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. He'll be able to answer that if you challenge him on it. How can you come on Shabbat? Right. Well, I parked far, far away and I walked over. It's okay. So this idea of one another Hasidic Rebbe says, certainly the Jews won't have any complaints if he came on Erev Shabbos, even if it means they'll prepare a little bit less food for Shabbos. It's okay. So we have this idea that Motzei Shabbat, and this is a beautiful midrash. I like this one very much. Another reason for this custom of mentioning Elijah or singing a song for Elijah is that every Motzei Shabbat, this is a beautiful story. It's a beautiful example of the rabbinic imagination. Every Motzei Shabbat, every time the Shabbat departs, Eliyahu enters Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, and he sits beneath the tree of life, and he records the merits of the Jews, especially the merits of those who were careful to keep the Shabbat holy. For there's one more tradition that says, if all the Jews keep just one Shabbat, Mashiach will come. Thus, at the conclusion of Shabbat, we turn to God saying, we kept Shabbat. Now please send Eliyahu to herald the redemption. Imagine, my friends, trying to get Jews to agree on anything. That would be messianic. There's no question about it. That would be messianic. And of course, in the Havdalah, which talks about the demarcation between the end of Shabbat and the start of the Yemei Chol, Lahavdil is to separate, there is a text that praises God. We say in the Havdalah, which separates between the holy and the mundane, between light and dark, between Choshech and Yisrael, Amim, between Israel and the nations, between the seventh day and the 6 days of activity. So this connects to Elijah, because as I say earlier, Elijah is about creating new delineations and clarifications, particularly when it comes to the lineages that I mentioned earlier of people being given their tribal ancestry. This is before Ancestry.com and before whatever the 123, which I forgot the name for. So
we need you to adjust your screen. I can't
screen?
see you. I
you
can't.
can see me? Okay. Can you see me now? Can you see me now?
No.
Tilt it down.
Oh, my
Tilt
screen.
the
Yes.
camera
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
I just lost my head. That's all.
Thank you.
So what I found interesting in looking some of this stuff up is how different communities took this Eliyahu thing very seriously. Like we sing the song once, but there were some communities that said they had to say his name, again became formulaic in a way, that his name had to be said a certain amount of times. For instance, Eliyahu HaTishbi, 40 times. Eliyahu HaGiladi, 40 times. And then recite each one again 3 times, concluding with Eliyahu HaNavi for a total of 130 times. And then they conclude with the way we do, B'mhera, Yavo, Eleinu, in Mashiach ben David. He will speedily come with us with Mashiach ben David. And others recite every verse in scripture that mentions him by name, while many simply sing and recite the hymn that mentions his name. So mentioning Elijah and Motzei Shabbat is seen by many as a skula. Skula is an interesting term. A skula means trying to get the right word. In modern Hebrew, skula is a talent, right? Something that you're right, misugal. I mean, misugal so is or a capacity to do something. Or in some cases, the skula became an amulet and a remedy.
Yeah.
So the skula, particularly, is the skula for forgetfulness and to bring forth blessings for a successful week. So, of course, the main point is that we start off every day with a fervent prayer that Eliyahu will herald the redemption. And of course, we hope it will be speedily in our days. And remember, my friends, that this major idea about the Mashiach and the Messianic age, originally it was just Mashiach. And then it became a Messianic age when people who weren't that orthodox were sort of, not that, how should I say, comfortable in talking about a Messiah, particularly after the advent of the Christian idea that Jesus was the Messiah. So there was a tendency to get away from a single individual as the Messiah, and it became a Messianic age, if you will. And that was the way it's called. But in Orthodox circles, they still see it as an individual. I personally, if I can mention that, have no problems with seeing how one person can change the world. We have a guy who people know, I'm sure, Theodore Herzl, right? Theodore Herzl. Anybody remember Frank Rich, who was the commentator, the cultural commentator in the New York Times?
Yeah.
Frank Rich?
Yep.
So imagine Herzl was the Frank Rich of his time, far more sophisticated. He was a playwright, a cultural critic, wrote for the best newspapers, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Journal. He was known all over as a great critic. Imagine a Frank Rich deciding that he wants to create a Jewish state. Okay, an assimilated Jew. And between 1897 and 1904, how many years is that? 7 years.
Yes.
And he dies at the age of 44. He literally kills himself. Works all the time. Workaholic, bad heart, drops dead at 44. Here's one person who changed the face of Jewish history. One person. And many saw him as messianic. Matter of fact, there's great support from Eastern European Jews who were raised in this idea of Mashiach, right? Had no problems with seeing, this one guy could do it. Maybe he's the one. So I'm still, and everybody they say is a potential Mashiach. Everybody who's born is a potential Mashiach. And that's a good way to live, I think, to think that each of us has that capacity to change the world. And it helps to have friends who agree with you. But there's something really special about that idea that the individual can have such power in what they do in life. It's really something. So any comments about Eliyahu and Havdalah? We're moving along beautifully now. I'm actually on schedule tonight. Hard to believe. Anybody? Nope. Okay, that's great. So let's move on to just a summation of what we've been doing. And what we were doing is we were looking at a figure in Jewish history, as much as we can see that he actually existed or not. Remember, I'm not sure any of these people ever existed. All I know is I'm glad we have them in our family. Okay, I'm glad because the Torah is our the Torah and Tanakh is our photo album.
Yeah.
Folks in our family. And some of them have faults and they don't have faults. And this is before Photoshop. You couldn't take your Aunt Nellie out who you didn't like, etc. Right? You had to have her in the family album too. So this great figure, and he never gets his own book. It's only 4 or 5 chapters we read that had Elijah in it. Ken was telling me he was following up on Elijah's major student, Elisha, and Elisha has quite an interesting biography as well, right?
Yeah.
As a miracle worker, it's worth looking that up. So we took this figure Elijah and we gave him this extraordinary circumstance. He never dies. He never dies. He immediately rises up there. And this, of course, is fascinating because there must be some unique relationship that Elijah has with the universe, with God, with however you want to see it, that the natural process of death does not take him. And by the way, this is what defines us as being human, all of us, is that ultimately we will all pass from this world one time or another, hopefully not for many, many years. So Elijah's specialness is that he is different than us because he has avoided the death, the Malach HaMavis, right? The angel of death. And because of that uniqueness, he's put into a tremendous amount of empowerment. And this empowerment that he gets, he basically uses for the good. He uses for the good. He becomes an interceder. He intercedes with us and with the divine. And that's why, as I mentioned really early in the beginning, as someone who's gotten a bit interested in Buddhist thinking and Buddhist thought, he reminds me of the Buddha in a way. Because the Buddha reaches enlightenment, goes beyond death, is able to make himself at one with the universe, and yet he comes back. He comes back to help others reach that place. So there's something about an Elijah nature like there is a Buddha nature. And I think it's that Elijah nature within us, within the Jewish people, that may explain a little bit about our resilience and our perseverance, that we will never die as a people. That's the hope. Because we have a job to do. We have a job to do. We have to redeem the world. It's a mishigas, it's crazy. But our mishigas, our craziness is that it's the whole world we're talking about, not just the Jewish people. And that's why we have the covenant of Sinai. The covenant of Sinai is to keep us in a special kind of environment that allows us to bring the entire world to the covenant of Noah. That's our goal. We are Mamlechet Kohanim, a nation of people who serve. And who are we serving? We're serving the world. And I think we have shown that, certainly in the last 100 years in this country, how much we have worked so hard, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. And that has become part of a Jewish identity. Thank God. And where does it start? It starts with that Elijah, when we open the door to Elijah, when we have this Seder, when we talk about how important human freedom is. That's where it starts. And it starts also the fact that we're willing to do something in our own physicality, to have a Brit Milah, which something you can't get ever back again. We're giving something up. It's our giving up. And there are many, many ways that we can do that. But I am still of the old school. I believe male Jews should be circumcised. But that's the old school today, it seems. But I think it'll come back again. It's a trend. So any comments, questions about how Elijah's affected you, about how much of this is brand new to you, how much do you still have to digest? Please let it out. We have about 15 minutes or so. So let's go for it. Yes, I see a hand. Phyllis Moore.
Okay, my grandfather claimed to have met Elijah once.
Oh.
We were at a Seder, and I'm the only one who remembers this. Even my parents don't even remember it. And he told us when he was a young man, he came to this country from Poland. An old man in tattered clothes knocked on his door and asked him if he had any food to share for Passover. My grandfather had just come and he was really poor. He lived in a one-room shack. I don't know where he lived. And all he had was a box of matzah. So he gave him the box of matzah. And the guy thanked him very much. And then a few years later, my grandfather did not want to be drafted to World War I. And because he thought that people who were drafted just weren't coming back. So one day he was running to catch the bus and he tripped and fell and broke his ankle. And when he looked up, that old man was standing there. So he was sure that it was Elijah who had him break his ankle so he couldn't be drafted. And then he said something that bothered me, I guess much later. He said, if I had given him more food, I would have been a wealthy man now.
Because that was the idea, right? He would always, Elijah would leave a sack of gold, and etc.
Right.
Yeah.
So that
Lily,
when I think about it now,
yeah,
that really bothers me. That here he was, the head of this table of his grandchildren, children, all adoring him, and having a beautiful Seder. And he said he would have been a rich man. So anyway,
if I were a rich man, right? Lily sent the name of a book to me. I know she sent it to everybody, but it's a book precisely about people who have had encounters with Elijah.
Oh, really?
In their lives. And because Elijah can come in many different guises, you don't know who's your Elijah. So, but one thing it's always about, and this is interesting, he always wants to see how magnanimous people can be.
Mm-hmm. And
how even if you don't have something, you still can share it.
There was the food in the beginning when you told us the story. Yep.
That's right. It's a fascinating litmus test of generosity.
Right.
Which indeed, if not rewarded here, will be rewarded in other ways. Evelyn wanted to say something, and then we'll move on.
So, I'm doing this study group. We're reading the book, The Prophet, and but Elijah isn't in that book. I don't think.
No. He's not one of the biggies. He didn't get a book. Yeah.
Because Heschel.
You have Isaiah, Jeremiah.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And
those are the biggies. Yeah.
And we're looking at this whole question of what distinguishes the Hebrew God from Greek versions of the divinity.
Sure.
And so I'm just thinking of what you said and how one would, put the question of Elijah into that conversation.
Right.
Well,
as I say,
he's different.
He wouldn't fit comfortably with. I think he's his zealotry. That's why he's seen as a reincarnation of Pinchas, right?
He was zealous. I mean, that seems.
He was zealous, right? His zealotry sort of was his Achilles heel, and maybe because of that, he doesn't. He leaves the scene very early. We don't know how old he is. He could be. This could have been he was 25, 30. I don't know. There's no way of knowing. He doesn't leave as an old man. We don't know. The mystery of him is quite good. But the mystery of all the prophets, we have no idea who they were. I mean, we know that they were schools of prophets.
Yes. I mean, the thing
we knew there were schools of prophets, right? And what a prophet meant is unclear too. I'm sure they deal with that as well. And that this is the one by Abraham Joshua Heschel.
Yes.
Very hard book to read.
Chapter by chapter from beginning.
It's a very hard thing. It was his doctoral dissertation and was German. So the question is if the translation still retains some of that Germanic tone or not.
Well, one of my questions has been to this little group is having started it as his dissertation before World War II, and then having published the book in English after World War II. How did his thinking about God, about a divinity, change? Well, and I don't know.
Well, sure, it's easy to know. Read the 14 books he wrote after the Shoah.
Thank you.
where he talks
Thank you for
precisely.
that
No,
suggestion.
but I'm saying he talks precisely to your issue. One is called A Man in Search of God,
Mhm.
and God in Search of Man. So he's basically realizing that we have to look now. It's not there in a blatant way. He happened to remain a fairly traditional believer compared
I
to
know.
others. Compared to
Yes.
others, yeah. He also wrote a very beautiful elegy for Eastern European Jewry called "The Earth is the Lord's." I recommend it to you. It's a highly idealized, romanticized, but his entire world was destroyed
Mm.
that he grew up in. I mean,
Well, that's what I mean. And to be able to the book is published post World War II, and to discuss a Hebrew God and his relationship to people post World War II.
Right.
Took
And
a lot of-
there are now some wonderful works. If you don't want to read Heschel on its own, people have wrote about Heschel. The most recent one is by Shai Held. It's quite an interesting thinker, and he's at the Hadar Institute. Yeah, Shai Held, and he wrote a
I
very
know the name. Yeah.
about a year or two ago came out with a major theological work about Heschel. But you're right. He eventually, what helped him, I think, work it out was a sense of the fact that there's always oscillation between one's belief and one's disbelief. It doesn't remain constant. So if somebody tells me I'm an avowed atheist, I said, wow, you're really religious about it. I said, that's pretty good. You really believe you don't believe. I mean, that's terrific. How are you so sure? So, I like agnostic better a little bit. Agnostic at least has a little bit of humility.
A little humility in it.
A little humility. I don't know, but you say atheist, don't you give up? It's already a big madrega. It's like the joke about the Apikokoros, right? To be a heretic in Judaism, you have to know something that you're rejecting. So to be a good heretic, you have to spend 25, 30 years in yeshiva and then reject it all. And there's, okay, that's a real Apikokoros.
That's me.
Yes.
Oh, well.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, motion.
Yes, Ken, and then we'll go to
So I have a real problem with the idea that we have a prophet who then goes up to I don't know if it's heaven, but goes up somewhere, and then comes down from time to time to visit us.
Yeah.
I mean, so is this our? When did so Elijah's written into the Bible,
right?
But all the talk of him coming back to earth, is that also in the Bible, or is that
no?
Is that Midrash?
No, that's all after, right?
Okay.
It's this very mysterious thing. Elisha is there, and he sees the whirlwind, and he's brought up in one shot to the so it's
big chariot,
right? And it's a very it's a very mythological scene,
right.
It's a mythological scene that kind of.
So this is more like the Greek gods who, would come back to earth in different disguises and.
Correct. Very interesting, right?
Interact with people in sometimes in not very good ways. Right. So it's interesting that we have this concept and that it's embodied in Elijah and not in, Abraham or Moses or.
That's right.
Of our forefathers.
Right.
I mean, it looks to me like the rabbis were saying, you know what, we're going to give up on this idea that we'll have an abstract God that people will believe in. It's not going to work. It hadn't worked in 3,000 years. It's still not going to work. So why don't we invent this guy that occasionally shows up? People can identify that there is
but the point is,
it's a Jesus-like concept, right?
Jesus doesn't come back. He's coming back, I hear. That's what I hear.
Okay,
right. I hear he's coming back. But as one of my teachers years ago said, when he comes back, we'll ask him if he was here before. So we'll know. We'll solve that issue. But no, I think he is a mythic character. He is a mythic character that usually does not come down like the gods of from Olympus to cause damage or to punish. He's not a punishing God. He's not a god.
Right.
He's this essential. I would say he's an essence of a person. We know he has. We don't know if he has a family. He doesn't know he has children. He seems to be a sui generis, where it's just hard. And I'm not certain. I'm still always pondering why Elijah does it, and I think it's because Elijah is being put in. If you what we read, he's recapitulating, if you will, the Moses role, and because Moses was pushed to the side, Elijah comes to fill a lot of that role. In general, he goes to Sinai. He has a revelation. He hears that the small, still voice, all that, which we still understand as being where real stuff goes on, and not in the noise. The real stuff goes on when it's in there in the quiet place. That's where the work gets done. The boisterous types and the yelling and shrieing, that's good. That's all fine. But ultimately, where real commitments emerge are from the deep, small voice, Shana.
So I was more drawn to the idea of Elijah as a mythic character. And if we think of him, particularly after what, was it Ken who said some things about him?
Yeah.
I think that if we see him as a presence that comes by to remind us to not judge a book by its cover, to remind us that we need to be compassionate with each other and to see the God in each other all the time. It's not he comes down occasionally. He can come by any moment.
Exactly. And he always appears as a very marginal person.
Yeah.
Understand? He's a marginalized person. How you treat the marginalized in your society shows what kind of society you have.
That's right. And that's like
yes, and that's what Elijah does. He reminds us all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but I say he was a beloved. I mean, my mother would know Elijah stories. I'm trying to tell Elijah stories now to my grandchild, and you can make them up.
Yeah.
You don't have to read the book of Kings to your kids. You just talk about that fellow who helps you find where you have to be, and then puff, he's not there anymore.
Yeah, but that's the wonder of it. That it invites us into being a participant in this whole religion bit.
Beautiful. I like that a lot.
Well,
I like that.
Phyllis's grandfather.
He was. Excuse me.
That's the story of Phyllis's grandfather.
Right. And now Phyllis's grandfather grew up in a world where Elijah was how shall you say the word, palpable. Everybody talked about Eliyahu, and it was just part of the culture very much. I think Alan wanted to say something.
I'll just ask a question because I like what let's see, I understood or appreciate what Shana was just synthesizing, but could you compare like Elijah with, I think during Jewish history, like the last 2,000 years or something, at least there's been like what the false messiahs, right? The appearance of the false messiahs. And what's the distinction between, say, the character of Elijah versus the false messiahs?
Well, first of all, Elijah's not the Messiah.
Yeah.
Okay. He's a harbinger. So right. Nathan of Gaza, for instance, who is the prophet that introduces Shabtai Tzvi, sees himself as Elijah. John the Baptist in the Christian tradition is Elijah, right? He's the harbinger of the coming of the Messiah. So there's always, you got to understand that to be a good Messiah, you need a lot of good PR. You got to have somebody who's creating an ideology, creating a mythic structure where this guy is going to fit in. And invariably, these were charlatans, and we don't always do well with the Mashiach. So the question is, do we want the Mashiach to come, or is it going to be too complicated? Who knows? because I have a feeling the joke is if Mashiach came, half the Jewish people would say, how do you know he's a Mashiach? Does he have a Mashiach card? Does he have whatever it is?
Well, you can ask if he's circumcised.
Well, circumcised, I'm sure, but the bottom line is that if you see Mashiach at Messianic times as a time when we can actually pull it together, this is what Luria, Rabbi Luria, was all about, right? Rabbi Luria said, "Look, liberate the sparks of holiness of the world, return them to their source, make your mundane life and your mundane activity something that liberates." Something that opens things up. Then guess what? Mashiach will come and say, you guys did it. Right? That's the difference between Lurianic messianism and other messianisms. It's an activist messianism. Litaken olam b'malchut Shaddai. Working on tikkun olam. And if it works, I'm right there to sign at the bottom, you made it. Mashiach is here. And that's a very different way of thinking than the passive way, where we shouldn't do anything, and God, by the grace of God, it will take place, right? So, and then, of course, what complicated all this was the Jesus mythology, right, which complicated everything, right? But even there was a skepticism also about the Mashiach in the Talmud, a very famous midrash, which you probably have heard. If you're in the middle of planting a tree, and someone tells you the Messiah is here, go on planting the tree. Right? Because if you look out your window and the world has not totally changed, there's no Mashiach. And what does totally change mean? People stop killing each other. You got a weite Weg zu führen. We have a very long road to
Get there.
the ride to get there. But that's the ultimate thing for us. And this is what made the Jesus thing fantastic. Jesus will save you from death.
Yeah.
Jesus will save you from death. You will have everlasting life. Everlasting life.
But if the Jesus scenario, though,
Excuse me?
requires faith, or
Yes.
requires belief.
Yes, belief. Right.
Whereas ours doesn't really.
Well, ours likes to judge people not what's in their heads, but what they do with their hands.
Right. So planting the tree is more important than having a belief.
Absolutely. But the point is, it's look, the church later got involved in this too, faith and works. We're not the first ones, who said, what's the balance between faith and works? Same thing in our tradition. Our balance is that we believe that there's keva, the stuff you got to do. You got to do. And there's kavanah. But if you don't have the kavanah, you still got to do the keva, what the established stuff. If you have kavanah on top of it, it's gewaldic, it's fantastic, it's great. Then you can add a great intentionality into what you're doing. On the other hand, there's certain things you must do. And that's why, as I mentioned to you once, I believe Rabbi Heschel says it so beautifully. It's amazing how Rabbi Heschel, it's 50 years since he's gone almost, and he's now the most popular. He says, to be a Jew is not to take a leap of faith, but a leap of action. So that's maybe how he understood a post-Holocaust world. That it's what we do when we have to do it. And if we don't do it, like Elie Wiesel says, not doing anything is complicit.
That's why he marched with Martin Luther King.
This is coming up today too, when we deal with the issues of racism and not racism. What does it mean? Oh, I'm not a racist. Yeah, okay,
That's
you're
me.
not a racist. It's okay.
Question. It's like
I'm glad you're not a racist.
incredibly
But what are your
insightful.
actions?
I was like, I am that person.
You know what I mean? What are we doing about it?
I interviewed for the JTI.
And we have a mandate now to do something about it. I hope we will not lose that mandate.
I'm Jewish educator.
And
And I think with your mom,
so
I was like, can I say
it
that?
is 8:30.
Do you think-
Time is up. Yeah, please.
But I'm just wondering do you think that that in a way Eliyahu had an advantage by being a mythical figure? He couldn't be like the false messiahs were finally identified as false messiahs because they were concrete and you could actually have something to point at.
Remember,
that
Elijah's not the
Eliyahu-
Messiah. I just want to keep saying that. He's
I
not
know
the Messiah.
that, but the characteristic is comparable to what you expect of a Messiah.
Right.
So,
Mm-mm.
and okay, there's people shaking their heads negatively. Maybe I should stop, but I think
No,
that,
stop. I mean, I think we have people
I
have
just
different
wonder
opinions.
if
It's
the
okay.
false messiahs were so carefully analyzed and then finally declared as false messiahs because there was enough concrete information to talk about.
No, because the
Whereas
world
they-
didn't change. Because the world
Yeah.
didn't change.
Well-
That's I see. That's for us Mashiach. You have to have proof in the pudding. It's not theoretical. And whether or not, as I say, it's good to maintain this idea of the individual Messiah or not, that's up to you. I think we talk now about Messianic age, et cetera, et cetera. Why is it important? It's important only because when you have a teleology, that's the term, teleology, a place where you're going towards. We have what is called in German a Heilgeschichte.
teleology is sort of proves
It pulls
itself.
us forward. It pulls us forward. You know, some people say that the greatest kind of contribution that Judaism gave to the world was the idea of progress. That things don't stay the same.
I thought it was Shabbat.
Shabbat was good too.
Yes.
That was progress when you had a world that didn't have Shabbat, right? That's pretty good. But I'm saying it really this Mashiach is a force. It's like a power force that pulls us forward and saying, you know what, we always have to get better. We also have to work at it. It's not something that's going to come on its own. So we have a different kind of idea than the eternal recurrence that everything goes around and around. We believe the world began in the sense that human civilization began, and we believe that human civilization can reach its ultimate destiny. And its ultimate destiny is not to destroy itself, even though it looks like we are doing a very good job at that part. So that's what is the ultimate destiny? And this is where the Yidlach come about. The Yidlach kept saying, you know what? There will be a Mashiach side. There will be a Mashiach, no matter what. And you know, part of the problem with that is, of course, is that you get people who will claim to be the Mashiach, right? That's the problem, right? Even this whole Lubavitcher Rebbe thing, you know, has led to a lot of people being very upset. But you know, the reason they see, my interpretation of all of the false messiahs, and I don't want to say the former Lubavitcher Rebbe is a false messiah. I'm saying he's not the Messiah. Okay, he's not false. He's not. When he made the claim or not make the claim, I'm not getting into. But the bottom line is, it's always following a tragic time.
Yeah, of course.
Because one of the things about is that there are Chavle Mashiach. There are pangs before the Mashiach comes. And I think in order for them, for the ultra-Orthodox community, in particular Bob Abish and others, to not deal with the issue of the Shoah as a break in the covenant, a great, as they say, a Caesura, you know the term, Caesura, a great break. They had to say, no, these were Chavle Mashiach.
These were what?
Chavle, the pangs, the pain that has to, precedes the redemption, right? What was Shabtai Tzvi's thing? It was the expulsion from Spain, right? And the Lurianic stuff that started, etc. What was it for others? It's always following a tragedy of some kind. And because it ultimately, what Mashiach can do is uplift the spirit and say there is purpose. And we all need purpose. And it's a good purpose compared to others, you know. So this is Elijah's role. Elijah's role is to, you using a bad metaphor, forgive me, is to tenderize us. You know, put a little tenderizer on us to sort of make us a little bit more supple, a little bit more able to receive and not be rigid. Because remember, you have to be able to receive as much as we give. And that's hard. How would we receive redemption today? You know, it's a real question. So we will get together again, God willing, in another context. Somebody suggested, and I'll open it up to you, and if it means anything, in our class on the 4 Jewish thinkers. The last thinker was Arthur A. Cohen. And one of the things I sent out to people was this great story that he wrote, which was part of a novel in the days of Simon Stern called The Last Jew on Earth. It's a very long story, but a number of people from that class said, wouldn't it be great if we all read it and came together for one evening just to discuss it? So I will figure out if that's something that people want to do. If you would want to do it, fine. If you're a member, if you were part of that class, you got it online. And if you're not part of the class and we have this discussion, you certainly can have it. It's a very interesting story. Yes. Betsy, were you in that class? I remember.
No, well,
No.
I'm interested to know, could you give us the page count? Well, how long is it?
I think it was that long. No, it was,
Yeah, really.
I'm trying to figure out how many pages. I'll try to figure that out.
You're
Yeah.
asking.
It was
Not a
about,
question
I was
to
saying it's
ask
about
for emotion.
20 pages, 25 pages.
Okay, you're saying.
Oh, it's not a whole book. It's a story within a book.
Yeah.
And it's sort of
That's very reasonable.
called The Last Jew on Earth. It's a very, it's sort of a teaching tale, if I use that term. It's a teaching tale. And so maybe we'll do that. We'll see. But if you guys agree is better, we'd like to get a nice group of 15, 20 people. That's perfect size for us, etc. So, and I heard some of your other comments, and I'm thinking about it and going to talk to Tiferet, and she handles everything. If Tiferet says no, forget about it. So you got to be nice to her.
He's our educator.
He's our educator, exactly, and
Well, I think you apply.
we are blessed to have her. She's been helping us in so many ways, especially during this very difficult time. I don't know how you maintain the patience of keeping the school going in these crazy times. It's really weird, but she's doing it. She's doing it.
Her class up with Kabbalah is absolutely fabulous.
Yes, you're using the book by Jikatilia. Is that the book you're using?
Yeah.
Joseph Jikatilia. Tough name, but Jikatilia. Yeah, with all the different names of God. That's really terrific.
Yeah, no.
For the Muslims, there's 99 names of God. The Muslims say there are 99 names. And we probably have close to it, if you think about the various ways that we refer to God. And what I like about our arrangement of names, just to say a few words, is that it doesn't get us locked into any one image.
Mm-hmm.
And there's room for quote unquote more secular terms, right? Mikor Chaim, the source of life, whatever you want to call it. I mean, you don't have to get into the 4-letter name, which is so complicated. I mean, it's so small and so complicated at the same time. So that's one of the advantages of having different names, because ultimately you are a different person all the time. I don't believe everybody stays the same. I think everybody changes. And sometimes your relationship with the divine is going to be opaque. You're going to see nothing. Darkness and the eclipse of God. Right? And the eclipse of God. On the other hand, there'll be days when you're going to
Bye-bye.
see that sun shining in that tree, and you're going to say, wow, look what I'm part of. I'm part of the divine. So it's good either way. It's good anyway. You take it.
As always, thank you, Reb Moshe.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always
Yeah.
fun. It's always fun.
That's
So
great.
you'll be hearing from me. I'm not going anywhere.